Welcome, welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest Camilla Reese, MBA. Camilla Reese has been an activist, researcher, author, and producer on the effects of electromagnetic fields on health for nearly a decade. She is Senior Policy Advisor to the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy in Washington, D.C., where she oversees policy papers on electromagnetic fields. And she received the 2018 Award in Public Health from the Global Foundation for Integrative Medicines. Camilla Reese, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's a great pleasure to have you on. Now, you are an expert on electromagnetic pollution. You've been involved in so many EMF initiatives, as I laid out in my introduction, but you were once a corporate executive. So how so? What took you from corporate exec to what you're doing now?
Yes, that is true. And actually, I'm using a lot of my corporate executive skills on the communication front for this field of activism. I used to be in the financial industry, and so I ended up becoming very sick from electromagnetic fields. And when I realized just how much science there was on this topic, I just thought ethically that I couldn't do anything else besides give a year of my life pro bono to help the scientists communicate better what they know and what the science says. I thought it would just take a year of some communication skills, but little did I know the big beast that we're up against. And it's been a decade now that I've been helping to communicate the what is known and the risks and the solutions and what this all means for the future of our species.
Yeah. So I just so people can understand where you're coming from. So your health was impacted. Can you just develop on that a little bit so we can get an idea, an understanding on that?
Sure. I had for many years focused on the healthcare sector, knew a lot about health and medicine, and all of a sudden I find myself getting really dizzy, not being able to concentrate, not being able to open my mail or prepare my to-do list at my home. And after a couple of weeks of this, I realized there was something really wrong. I was wondering actually if I was getting Alzheimer's. I couldn't, and then I would have heart irregularities lying on my bed. I had vision changes, skin eruptions. There were a few times when I literally collapsed to the floor. I couldn't stand up. My whole body just crashed, and I was in a puddle on the floor and had to crawl to the phone to get someone to come and help. And so I knew what it wasn't. I knew that I was healthy and that I was okay other places. So I knew it had an environmental aspect to it, but I also knew it wasn't mold or chemicals or anything like that. And so I put an email out to a listserv of scientists who said, and I said, does anybody know how I can measure electromagnetic fields? Because years before I had attended several conferences with Deirdre Klinghardt, where there was a case study of a young man who had a chronic neurodegenerative condition, told he was going to be in a wheelchair, and it turned out he was in the beam of a radio tower in Seattle. So I'd never forgotten that, even though I thought it was most strange, and it would never happen to me, having been in New York or where we don't have hills like that. And I remembered it. And so I put an email out on this listserv to scientists. I said, can somebody tell me how I would measure if there's something like that were going on? And so Cindy Sage was coming, who was the co-author of the editor of the Bioinitiative Report, was coming to San Francisco the next week for a conference, and she brought a meter, and I had it for a couple of weeks and figured out that the new neighbors who had moved in on the other side of the wall from my pillow had put a router there, and right there, inches from my head. And that was the source of the problem. So it was a big wake-up call. Before that, I'd also noticed that I was getting some sharp shooting pains in my head from using the cell phone. and would go into the T-Mobile store and say, "Is there something wrong with this phone? Maybe it's defective." Because, oh no, they didn't think so. So both of those things started happening around the same time, and so that was the rude awakening. I was very seriously debilitated, and it took many, many, many months of my life to restore my health, and I did. So. Yeah. Fortunately.
Fantastic. And you did, and we're going to I'd like to talk about that a little later on, because that's people who are listening are going to want to learn what they can from you. That's really important. But so yeah, your story is fascinating, and obviously when you hear that story, I relate to it totally because I've got a similar story. And when you hear that story, it makes me think, well, how many thousands or millions of people in the world are living, with a router the other side of their pillow, just like you were, and don't know about it. And at the same time, I'm sure that you were angry, because that's what I went through, the sort of the angry stage, and a kind of not accepting stage, and the angry stage, and went all these different stages of this, electrical hypersensitivity, and then the realization of how fortunate you are that you were actually able to put two and two together, and that you are one of the people that has an understanding of these dangers, because initially it does seem like you've drawn the short straw. But actually, when you look back, that's how I look at it anyway, is I feel incredibly fortunate and blessed to have experienced this. So I want to ask you, because I know you've talked to many doctors, scientists, and other experts over the years about EMFs, and because obviously you don't need any convincing of the dangers, but people do need to understand, and whether they need to be convinced or not. But let me put this question to you. What is the most convincing bit of science that you can give to someone who is poo-pooing this?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so many different kinds of studies, ranging from cellular studies, DNA studies, epidemiology studies, studies on the systems of our bodies, studies on the cognitive function. There's not one particular study, but what is most very compelling is if you look at the how much science there was years and years ago. In 1971, the Naval Medical Research Institute in the U.S. published a review of the science on electromagnetic fields. Then in 1979, there was a paper, I have it here right now, called Early Research on the Biological Effects of Microwave Radiation, reviewing the science from 1940 to 1960, and the paper concluded that it was a real mistake to have stopped the science in this field, and assuming there was no harm, and assuming that the only kind of risk was the thermal risk from heating effects of the radiation. A very important paper. Then about 37 years ago, NASA also published a review of the science that showed headaches, fatigue, dizziness, all kinds of things we know as electrosensitivity today. In 2002, the EPA published a letter that said that these thermally based standards for the exposure standards do not apply because there are non-thermal effects. Then in 2012, I think it was, Nora Volkow at the NIH in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Energy Brookhaven National Lab published a study showing brain glucose metabolism changes. Then we have, in 2014, the Department of Interior said that this radiation was not appropriate for wildlife. It was harming wildlife. And then finally, more recently, we have the NTP study, the $25 million study done through the National Toxicology Program, which is part of the NIH, that showed clear evidence for risk for brain tumors and heart tumors and DNA damage in animals. Very large animal study, confirming all the other studies. But the sheer volume of this science Dr. Martin Pall has prepared a list. I think there are about 155 review studies that themselves each cover anywhere from a few dozen to hundreds to thousands of studies. So the body of science itself is large, showing biological dysregulation from this energy. It's an unnatural energy. We ourselves are electromagnetic beings. So this outside energy force comes in contact with our beautiful, system that's in like a, balance, and it throws all kinds of things off. So every single system of the body is impacted. Now, that being said, I'd say that the document that I would refer people to that's the most recent and most compelling about summarizing the science is by Dr. Martin Pall that he presented to the EU recently, in which he says that there is compelling evidence for 8 areas of harm from electromagnetic fields. There's the cellular DNA effects, and then there's the lowered male fertility, very important implications for future generations. You've got the neurological and neuropsychiatric effects, apoptosis, cell death, oxidative stress, many different types of cancer, many of the brain cancers, increase in intracellular calcium that has all kinds of other harmful effects, and widespread hormonal effects. So, our bodies are comprised of systems that all communicate in balance with each other. So we know that this radiation is a stressor. It's a stressor, and it is, and we know there's a huge body of research on stress impact on a connection with many different chronic diseases. So if you look at the science that shows the growth in many different chronic conditions since the mid-90s or since 1990, say, you see that ever since this infrastructure was, deployed, there has been tremendous growth in many different kinds of chronic illnesses. In autism, of course, it's not the only cause of that, but in neurodegenerative conditions, and depression, and there's just and Harvard physician, autism expert Martha Herbert says that given the coincidence of the timing of the growth in autism and the growth in the rollout of this technology, that we really have to go back and reestablish exposure guidelines that are biologically based, and that children should be protected from the radiation for sure, given the parallel growth paths of both the incidence of autism and the growth in infrastructure and devices. So there's no one area, but there's so much science. There's so many good websites now all around the world on this who are packaging the information. There are websites on and programs, conferences, many that we've put on children in electromagnetic fields. There are programs, there are websites on Wi-Fi in schools. We have a document that's called what are other countries doing to protect people, and it goes through over 24 countries and tells you little facts of what's happening there, both on the local level and on the federal level, and such as France recently completely banning cell phones in school. But there are many, many other countries. And when you read that, you realize, oh my goodness, we're really behind the times here in the US. We are not taking the steps here. I don't know about where you are, but we are not taking the steps fast enough to protect people. And we need to be looking at all the different options where we can minimize our exposures at every opportunity, and also redirect the future trajectory of telecommunications in general, which is heavily wireless based, antenna densification, they call it.
Yes. We're not. Well, I live in France, and but I'm of the same opinion. We're not taking the steps fast enough, and we got smart meters which are being deployed. We've got cell towers all over the place. We've got cell towers next to schools. We've got Wi-Fi in schools. So yeah, and there is. It's different countries are moving at different speeds on this, but it is a worldwide problem, and you've got countries in Africa where you've got indigenous populations and they've got nothing. They've barely got clean water, and yet they've got cell phones. So it's a crazy world. It is a crazy world.
It's a consciousness issue, really. It's a consciousness issue that we are allowing these technologies to proliferate without, and thinking that it's a good thing in many respects to tether us to technology and to integrate us with information and even to merge man and machine, where all this is ultimately heading or trying to head. Is a consciousness issue. People are missing out on the what life is about and the benefits of life, and that don't come from technology. They come from relationships with people and with families and with communities and with nature and with innovation from within ourselves, creativity, inspiration, intuition. These are things that are all being dumbed down and not considered important in this, high-speed tech world.
Yeah, and
issue, really, I think.
And so, I've spoken to quite a few people now on this summit alone, and people over the years, and there are people that are saying EMFs may be the root cause of many diseases. Would you go that far as to say that? And is there evidence, do you believe, to support that?
Yeah, I would say that if you read the work of Martin Pall, he explains, biologically how when the electromagnetic field hits the cell, it's always been presumed that these weak electromagnetic fields couldn't be the reason for these diseases because they're just so weak. But what he pieced together was that there's one part of the cell, the voltage sensor on the cell, that when the EMFs hit that voltage sensor, it has an impact on the cells over 7 million times the effect of those same low intensity fields on other parts of that same cell. And so it can explain all kinds of downstream effects, including the other things that have been considered mechanisms in the past, like oxidative stress. There's a large body of science showing EMF effects on free radical damage, oxidative stress, and on DNA damage and all these other things that we've known about for decades. Like I said, it now can be better understand with the understanding that it's the electrical component of our cells that are being majorly impacted. Now, he goes into that a lot. Richard Lear is another person who published a paper on the incidence of chronic illness since the 1990s. You can view it in ResearchGate. And, this is very compelling when you look at the percentage increase in all of these conditions, particularly the psychological, emotional, neuropsychiatric effects, the autism. There is. I don't think it's coincidental. So you can't make a general statement that everything is related to EMFs, because certainly we live in a toxic world where we've got the GMO foods, we've got a lack of quality minerals in the soil, we've got a lot of chemical exposures and heavy metal exposures. And so you can't blame everything, but everything is additive. It's all part of, the load. And what Dr. Zach Bush in Charlottesville says is that even more than the impact on the cell is he believes there's a precursor to the cell changes as well, which is from the impact on the bacteria in our bodies, that it's disrupting the bacterial communication systems in our bodies. And that's incredibly new insight and important. So, and we all have, been learning more recently the effect of the flora on our brains and bodies. So, there's plenty of evidence that this is messing us up, and there's plenty of evidence that we are sick people. We are very sick, and it is so sad to me to see the children that are non-functional, that are zombies, or that have digital dementia, or that are addicted to the technology, or worse, that have things like video game psychosis from spending their lives addicted to being online and really changing their brains. And there's one actually school shooting in Connecticut that the Newtown school shooting that where the shooter according to Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, who's the author of Glow Kids, had all the classic signs of video game psychosis. So it's a travesty what's happening. It's really a travesty.
It's a challenge for society, and it's a challenge which we all have to rise to. And on an individual level, as much as anything, we do. There's so much we can do, which we're going to talk about. But so things you talked about there, impacting our DNA. The fertility counts are being fertility in women is being massively effective. The sperm counts are just off the charts down. So am I being over dramatic in saying threat to the species?
No, I don't think so. Nor does Martin Paul. In his letter to Governor Brown in California, when we all were fighting a bill that was going to force the local governments to allow the wireless industry to put antennas on all street lamps and street lights and utility poles and other local municipal infrastructure, he wrote a letter, and he said that certainly the pace of, I don't remember his words exactly, but the pace of mutations that we're seeing in younger people, the more of this we're exposed to, the greater those mutations are going to be, and so he said he thinks we're already on a path of we're looking at the sperm declines and fertility effects across the board, across all countries, all developed countries. And he says things like antenna densification and more antenna infrastructure is only going to accelerate that. So who knows, when those fertility numbers are going to get worse and worse. But I think they're down 50% in countries. So I remember seeing an article in a paper here they were interviewing a woman who was the head of a sperm bank in Israel. And she said that it used to be that 9 out of 10 young men who would come in to make a little extra money during their college years, and they were in the prime of their lives, that 9 out of 10 would be acceptable for their purposes. And at that time, and this was about 7 or 8 years ago, only 1 out of 10 was a quality that they would be recommending for fertility use. So it's probably way worse already than 50%, I would guess.
Yes. I'd like to just have a word on smart meters, if we can briefly, because I know you were involved on that when smart meters were first being deployed, raising awareness about the dangers. So smart meters, the idea, the utilities telling us is that it's a great thing because we no longer need the meter man, and we're going to save money, and it's progress. But what they're not telling us is it's creating more electro pollution. So if you could just speak to that a little bit, what's happening with these smart meters, how big a problem is this, what kind of problem, because there's various types of smart meter pollution, isn't there, too? If you could just talk to that.
Sure. The smart meters are not needed. And I don't know about where you are, but we were sold a bill of goods because communities were sold a bill of goods because there was all this stimulus funding and the Obama administration, and the way the utilities here are structured is that they can charge back to ratepayers enough to cover any new capital investment, plus get a 10 to 13% return. So any capital investment is a good thing from their perspective for their investors. So they saw this pot of money and applied to get a lot of the stimulus funding and got it. And there was no need for this technology. The meters that were being rolled out had been developed 20 years ago by one of my colleagues, Tim Sheckley, who was involved with the development of those meters. He knows them intimately. And I was introduced to him, and he was saying that, well, they don't do what they're claiming, that they don't have anything to do with the facilitating integration of renewable energies and being more green and all of that kind of thing that they were playing up to the local communities. So when I dug into that and I realized, my gosh, they don't do what they're saying they're doing, so their benefits aren't really there, and they're harming people, I thought, okay, let's get together and we'll do a paper on this. So we published a paper called Getting Smarter About the Smart Grid, and explaining why, questioning why we were investing billions of dollars in meters that have nothing to do with no benefits to society, while bringing health concerns, privacy issues, cybersecurity issues, and so they are not needed. And if one needed a new meters, they can also be hardwired. There's no reason for them to be wireless. So meters today here are sort of across the board, ranging from some people still have the old analog meter where there's no health issue, no privacy issue, no cybersecurity issue, to the smart meters where there are mesh networks throughout neighborhoods that are broadcasting all of this data from all of the homes constantly, all the time, blanketing not only your home, but your neighborhood. And so they're doing this, even though it's not necessary, could be done much safer. So, it's another example of doing something for the profit motive or for the growth motive, because they can charge back the full amount plus 10 to 13%, depending on what state they're in. So they're disincentivized to and they're also disincentivized. The utilities are disincentivized because they bill on a per kilowatt basis. So they are incentivized to sell you more, not less energy. So they play lip service to all this, the greenwashing, that they're interested in renewable energies. But the fact of the matter is that they really can't integrate too much renewable energy into their portfolio of energy sources without collapsing the economies of scale of the baseload coal generation model for the rest of what they do. So it's and Tim Sheckley in that paper said it may eventually come down to needing a government bailout of these utility companies so that we really can move to renewable energy society.
Mm-hmm. And what can we do? Because, I was saying they're introducing smart meters in my neighborhood, the electric company, and there's a lot of talk about that one, and the gas company too, and nobody's talking about that, but that's actually possibly worse because it's by radio frequency radiation, whereas the electric company here in France is using the electric wires to transmit the data back. So what I did was I did the registered letter approach, and we can do that, and it seems to have worked for the electric company, and the gas company have keeping very quiet. I've had no reply for about a month. So what can you do in your part of the world? What's your advice on this? What can be done?
Well, there are probably almost 3 dozen states where there are people on fire, active on this issue, trying to get opt-outs, which really isn't a long-term solution. But and they do in some cases get opt-outs, sometimes having to pay for the ability to opt out, which is really not right. But then there's things that you can do to your house if they put it on your house. And so I have helped people put up sheet metal behind the meters on the inside wall inside their house to reflect the radiation from coming back into the house. Then these meters also put a lot of dirty electricity on the electrical wiring, and so you can filter and put filters in on the house or individual filters for the dirty electricity. There's some nice things. You've probably seen them, like I've never tested it, but like this metal mesh cage that goes over the meter that they say can still transmit. I don't know if it can, but in which case that's great, but it still doesn't address the dirty electricity issue or the back of the meters coming into the house. So you need to have some metal mesh. There's some Safe Living Technologies has a little kit to help people put behind meters that if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself. Fortunately, where I live, well, when I first moved here, I go into the place where the room where you throw out the trash in this condo building, and there they were like 8 meters right there. And I couldn't believe it. And I got out my measuring meter, and they were really high levels. And I was like, oh my God, why I didn't see this? I can't believe it. I just moved in here. Well, it turned out they were in a utility room. And the utility room happened to be all metal. And the door was metal. So there's absolutely nothing coming out of this room, thank goodness. But other people, I drive by apartment buildings where they have them on the outside of the apartment building, and you see the lineup of a dozen or more meters, and you wonder who is living on the other side of that wall. I'm from New York City, so I mostly have seen, dealt with the EMF issue in the city environment, but some outside the city. But when I see, in New York, where, when you see antennas on top of the building or on the side of the building, you can predict that somebody's going to be sick in there every single time. You just look at it. You can tell the curtains and the windows look like they haven't been washed, and it looks disheveled in there. It looks like somebody's not well. And I've had a chance to meet a lot of people that live behind these antennas in these buildings, and they're predictably always sick. And so I'm sure the same is the case with the smart meter banks on apartment buildings. And so, it's really tough if you're in an apartment building. If you have property, I know people who have actually had it moved, had the meter moved to be farther away, had it put on the outside of their garage far away. One has to be creative. There's no real textbook on this. You just have to think logically, how am I going to minimize these exposures?
Yes, absolutely. And there are many ways of going about it, and it's true when it's not always obvious when you don't know anything about this, but there are lots of ways of dealing with this. But I like to talk about wireless, because we're in a wireless world, whether we like it or not, we're going wireless. And but there is something safer and faster than much safer and faster than wireless. And what's it called? It's called wired. So I'd like to talk to you about that, because we don't talk about that enough. And there are new wired solutions which are coming out around the world. So can you just talk to that a little bit? About wired and
Sure.
The technology that's being used on that.
Yeah, sure. I think it's good to break it up into a discussion of in the house and outside the house. And in the house, you can, of course, it's better for you if you use Ethernet cords and, hardwire connection to your computer, hardwire your printer, hardwire everything in your home. You have the ability to do that, and can protect yourself a great deal just by doing things within your home. But then there's the bigger issue of the external environment and the access networks for the internet, which we recently published a paper on. Actually, I have it here. This is what's called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. And this goes over the how we got to the point where, really as a result of the Telecom Act of 1996 here, that ended up with a worse situation than we had before that, in terms of the monopoly power of Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast. How we got to the point where wireless access networks are being pushed over to far more intelligent, hardwired access. So this paper describes 13 different reasons why the wireless approach to access networks makes no sense. And I can just list some of those. You've got the speed of internet access is going to be faster with fiber, or with fiber plus copper tail, or other hardwired options. Fiber allows equal internet access. It improves the voice communication quality, reliability, dramatically lowers the energy use that from all of these antennas makes absolutely no sense. And God, what they're envisioning of the Internet of Things, there are really serious questions about how that can even be supported from an energy perspective. Fiber is more resilient in terms of extreme weather events. It's also a greater, much greater value for the money. It's better from perspective of safety and cybersecurity. Of course, public health, which is what we're talking about, personal privacy, and landline phone access when the power goes down, anyway, there are many reasons in this paper, but what we did with this paper was we don't want to just talk about health because, people can argue they are addicted to the technology. A lot of people, they don't want to hear it. But if you can argue it from many different perspectives, most importantly, the reliability, the resiliency and weather events, the energy usage and efficiency, you've got a whole nother group of constituents that can, start to listen and understand this issue. But there's bottom line is there are just so many good reasons that we should not be using the wireless approach. So we ask, well, why then are we? And of course, that gets you into the wanting to sell more chips and the growth ambitions of this industry. So. That's what we need to get behind. It's not really good to be against things. You can educate about the risks, but it's better to be for things. So for educating people how to live in their own homes more safely, it makes such a world of difference. To not have a cell phone by your bed or a portable phone for that matter, to have everything be hardwired, your computer, I use a hardwired connection always. And except if I'm traveling and I maybe have to be at a coffee shop quickly, I will check in. I'll look at something on wireless. But so it's there, but most of the time it's only hardwired. And we can do it. We can do it easily. There are even adapters today that you can adapt an iPhone and an iPad to be used with the Ethernet cord. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of people do that I know is with their cell phone, they need it when they're out and about, they think. But when they come home, they transfer it onto they forward it onto their home landline. So, and then as soon as they go out the door, they're on automatic. They just know to take it off of that. So at least when you're home, you can be sure that you'll get your cell phone calls if you forward it, and be a lot safer. So you really can do a lot, and we have a lot of content on this, as I know you do, on Manhattan Neighbors for safer telecommunications, electromagnetic health. So there are lots of resources. In fact, this is a great one, if I do say so myself. This is the wireless elephant in the room, this little booklet that one can read for free on manhattanneighbors.org or get on Amazon. And it sort of tells a story of how the reality of how we got here and what we need to know to activate people to understand this is real. This is not, this is real. This is not some psychological problem. People think they're being attacked by electromagnetic fields. It is invisible radiation, I understand, but it's biologically active, and there are many different forms of it, and higher and lower pulsing, and different signal characteristics. People need to understand this. One of the most important things I think we describe in this little booklet is that there's research that shows the impact of electromagnetic fields on drug actions. So, how many people take pharmaceutical drugs? Are there doctors asking them, well, do you sit near a router at work, or do you, sleep near your cell phone? Doctors don't even understand this, but there's research, somebody is pulling it together, that shows that in some cases it increases the effect of the drug. In some cases it lowers the effect of the drug. But the clinical trials were done in controlled environments and not assuming the proper environment that these things were going to be used in. So, you look at some of the overdose issues today and wonder, is there an EMF connection there? I do wonder. And what do we do with that? How many people take drugs? I mean, the average, I think, 80-year-old is on 18 drugs, I think I read. So, and a lot of teenagers too, and younger. So, very important.
Very important, yeah, that research continues, because as you were saying at the beginning, there is an overwhelming body of research already, because some people are thinking, well, yeah, it shows the research, there's no research, but there is research. There's a bucket load of research. But it's not that we're short of research, and it's not that we're trying to prove anything, but it's just that we've been put in a position of proving things because, the telecoms companies, the utility companies, they've got power, they've got the upper hand at the moment. And yeah, it should be them that are having to prove that this is safe, but they've already got this, they're already using this technology, unfortunately. So the tables have been turned, but the evidence is there. And what you're saying about the pharmaceuticals, you're absolutely right. And there's some, we need studies on that too, obviously. And when you're looking at these studies, there's so many that needs to be doing, because you can think of anything, any toxin, vaccines, heavy metals, you name it, any, fertilizers, then everything is being affected by these frequencies, and it can be making it worse, it can be making it better. We don't know, but there can be some very bizarre interactions, highly synergetic, or, completely the opposite. But we don't know. But what me and you, I think, know pretty sure on, that there's things going on here which we can't begin to understand, and these EMFs clearly are impacting our lives in just so many ways. But
destabilizing our biology, destabilizing our biology in a myriad of ways. And is that the way we want to live, or do we want to know what health really is, about what our potential is for high vitality and wellness, without interferences in our processes?
Yeah. Because we all do have this, this capacity to enjoy this high vitality, and you're the proof of that, I think, and so am I, because we've gone through this. And I want to talk about what you did, but firstly, just some basic tips. If I could say like 3 tips for somebody who's starting with this. Basic tips to be, EMF protection tips. What would your top 3 be?
I would say minimize use of a cell phone, like I do, where I have one and I don't use it unless I'm traveling. And then when I'm traveling, I don't leave it on. I leave it. I turn it on to get a message, or to use it for my convenience and with a headset or on a speakerphone. And so I really very rarely use it. But I got it. And so that makes a big difference. I use Skype online I have as my portable number. So wherever I am in the world, literally, I can plug into an Ethernet cord and talk to you. So that addresses the portability issue. And then the other thing is, in one's home, you've got to take responsibility for your home and for your sleeping environment. And just, if some people, I don't advise any wireless at all, but some people aren't, it takes a while for people to get to that realization that it makes a big difference in their health, but they're willing to start with overnight turning off the Wi-Fi. So now they're like plant light timers that you can get and put your router on, or there's a router from, I think it's the Netherlands, that has a timer built into it. So automatically it goes off at a certain hour at night, and on the next day you set it once and then you can forget about it. So again, I'm not advocating for wireless, but for those who are in transition toward realizing that it's far better to have none of this around us, that's a good thing to at least cut out 8 or 9 hours of exposure. Mm-hmm. And to get a much better quality of sleep. There are 70 million Americans have a sleep disorder. And I can't tell you how many people who have had insomnia, disrupted sleep, haven't slept well in years, who I go over there, find that they've got the router, turn it off, and they have the first good night's sleep in years. Yes. It is so predictable that anybody with a sleep problem should be looking at this.
Yes, anybody with a sleep problem, absolutely, that's listening to this, act on this information, do this now. And so that's the basic stuff. But obviously, when you're like, you can't function anymore, you can't use a cell phone, you can't be in front of a computer, you don't feel as though you can live in this modern world. And that's where I was back in 2002, and that's where you were at one point. So what did you do? What are your tips here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I knew that no doctor would be able to help me. This was 10 years ago. There was very little awareness at all. And I knew I had no legal right to ask the neighbors to not use their router on the other side of the wall for my pillow. So I was in a lot of despair. I really never felt despair. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I first just started spending a lot of time away and to gather my thoughts, be able to think well enough to be able to find a plan. And then I listened to my intuition, and there was nothing on the internet on this back then. And I listened to my intuition, and my intuition told me that I needed sunshine, that somehow the full spectrum of the sun had a role to play. My intuition told me I needed to move my body to help the communication systems in my body. And my other intuition told me that I needed to do a high vitality diet. So I went to a raw food retreat, and I was there for many months. And, you know, it was not cheap. Not everybody can do it, but you can do it if you find a safe place to be. I did living foods diet for almost 6 months. I swam every day outside in the sunshine in a pool. And so I got sun, and I moved the body, and I did the living foods diet, and those were the core things that I did. Mm-hmm. Exercise, diet, nourishment, and sun.
So it's interesting because I would have, not that I like cataloguing people, but I would have catalogued you as somebody who's in their head quite a lot. And it's interesting that you say you got this information from your intuition, because it's generally when we're more kind of intellectual, bookish, that we have greater difficulty accessing our intuition. We all have intuition. So how did you access this? You know, did you do meditation? You know, or did you lie in the grass for hours and it came to you? What was it? Where did it come from?
Well, I've actually always had a pretty strong intuitive sense. I get information that way. We get information, just instincts. We especially get information like that in the period of time between sleep and wake. In the morning, in the very early morning, you get information sort of from that bigger hole that you're connected to while you're sleeping. And so later on, I really, I started working with meditation, and I had before that too, but I wasn't at the time. Meditation, gratitude practices, into imagery. I work with patients with imagery, where it's a revelatory tool to learn. You can figure out a lot of things using a holographic kind of imagery. Mm-hmm. But for the average person, you don't need any of that stuff. You just need to be quiet and sink into yourself, and be in nature. Maybe it helps it. Be connected to the natural rhythms of the planet, of life. And the information will come to you if you quiet down, if you stop all the busyness and just listen in. And that's where we go. That's where you got to go on everything, really. We really need to be becoming our own self-authority more, and stop, following everybody else's advice for you, because really we know within ourselves much better than anybody else. We have access to those rivers of insight and information and forewarning also. Just quiet down, just go sit in the woods, sit at the beach, just go outside and look at the sky, we all have that, can plug into that connection.
Yes. It's a kind of disconnect, reconnect, is it not? So you need to disconnect all the crap, all the wireless and the cell phones and, all that digital stuff, and reconnect to what's really important. And it is nature, it is your family, and it is your friends. And it's not everybody, because some people are going to pollute as well. You've got the kinds of pollution from people. And it's about following your gut on this and your instincts. I'm totally with you on that. It's really interesting you say that, because I think it's the most powerful thing you can have is good instincts, because it can, you don't really have to be very bright. You just, because you don't really have to understand things. You just have to, if you have instincts about things, then you just know things are right or wrong, about what you're doing, about people that you're mixing with, etc., etc. And it's about empowerment, really, isn't it?
It certainly is. It is. It's about. It's all about that, because we have to, like I said, we need to learn to be our own self-authority and source our insight and information and foundation on which we lead our life from that bigger whole. Instinct is really a word that describes a connection to that bigger whole. It's something that comes from that bigger whole, and so we are so powerful when we are connected to that bigger whole. I really live in that space today, and means that you can be a lot more efficient, a lot smarter, do a lot less work, and get a lot better results. It's amazing, actually, when you are riding that wave and you get instincts of what to do, and don't let them pass. Don't ignore those things that come to you and think, oh, that wasn't important. Just really pay attention, because there is a guidance there of some sort that is positive, that is for us, that it wants us to be well, I believe. And, so a lot, throughout the millennia, different traditions have called it different things, but there definitely is that support. And that's my fear about all this technology use and the fragmentation and the ways in which people are becoming, through the fragmentation, they're becoming so unable to connect to those things. So unable, and particularly younger generations today that don't even understand. They're constantly being, fragmented with, this email or text or whatever. And we need to spend more time listening to ourselves, and being our own authority, for sure. And following our instincts about what is right, and finding our motivation to serve the world, like you are doing and I am doing. What's most important? Where should we be placing our life force energy? We were here on this planet for a short period of time, passing through. It's been life's going on, and what's really important? How do we want our life to be used? And we can get that information also totally from. We don't have to think it on head level. We can just
Absolutely. And that might sound a lot to people who are really suffering, who are listening to this, but it's just one step at a time. And you start with the basic stuff, the EMF, cutting out the wireless, etc., as much as you can. And all this, it does take time. It takes time. It took me years. Took you maybe months, I don't know, but it took me years. And I've interviewed a number of people who've very successfully overcome very debilitating electromagnetic hypersensitivity, people like Lucy Sanford, building biologists, people like Marie Richards here in France. And it's the same thing. So it's not always the same thing, because this is spiritual for me, and my path was a spiritual one. Interestingly, who would have thought it, because I wasn't looking for that at all. But certainly there are other people that have it's been a kind of an awakening for them and for me, and that's it. So it will be whatever you choose it to be, but the important thing is that you choose that it is not doom, gloom, and you're at a dead end, because there's so much you can do. And I just want to, before we finish, I just want to put a quick question on ask you very quickly your views on harmonizers, chips, resonators, diodes, and so on and so forth. What's your view on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that there are a lot of these things on the market, and I have had some support from one of these products that was really, really important. And however, I know people that are researching this field, serious researchers from the industry, previously from the industry. And what they are finding is that while some of these things have no effect and they're just people selling them and making money and they don't do anything, some of them are building our resiliency and can have a positive effect. Some are, I know one at least, that there's research that shows the effects on the EEG, on the brain effects, greatly reducing the effects on the brain. But in all cases, they have found that in the end, they have negative counterbalancing effects, and often on the immune system. So there is anytime you're pushing your body in a certain direction, you have to understand it might help you in the short term, but it may actually have an effect in the long term. So I'm a real naturalist. I'd rather not have to use things like this. And I'll give you one example. When I first was in San Francisco and was affected by the EMFs, I went to a scientist, Beverly Rubik, and she tested me in all these different machines, and she told me about the Q-Link. So it had a dramatic positive effect. And then I wore it. I wouldn't take it off. And then I ended up going back to the East Coast, to Rhode Island. I was at the beach. I felt great. I put it on the sink. I forgot about it. And I didn't wear it for days. And I felt fine. And then I couldn't find it before I left to go back to California. And I was like, oh, well, I'm feeling fine. Who knows what that was all about. I'll be fine. So I go back into the same apartment without it. And my symptoms were 100 times worse than they had been originally without it. So it was as if my body's own adaptation ability had been weakened because I wasn't using it. That's what I wonder. I don't know. But no question, for anyone who's truly desperate and really having a problem with, I think it's a great short-term solution. Mm-hmm. And then there are a couple others that I am well aware of. And, there's a possibility that some of these subtle energies and different things that they're putting into plastics and different things that they can have, they can be put into other materials. We're starting to see them being put into blankets and other things. And, and paints is coming. And, you just wonder, is this really the way we want to go? Or do we, finding little solutions to make us feel better? Or do we need to look at the whole situation and say, wait a second, we're going in a bad direction here. We need to be sure that our living environment is safe and pristine and it doesn't have these risks, and we can do it. We can do it. So I have mixed feelings about all these things. There's also the placebo effect where, people want to believe that something is helping them. That's great. The power of the mind is extraordinary. Some people can do it all with the mind, but not most. So, I've had three other very bad exposures. Lloyd, I should tell you, I had 2 office exposures that I had to navigate through, and another one where I live now, and where the office neighboring people in the office building put in routers, and I had to go to Home Depot, get the sheet metal, I dealt with those, and then the latest one, new neighbor moves in, wouldn't hear anything about the science. I couldn't think. I had to go move to a hotel. And, so this was years since the initial exposure. But when I am close to a power source, that seems to be the worst for me. A little bit of Wi-Fi in the environment is okay. Not that I want it, but because I know the science. But when I'm near a power source, it really dysregulates my brain. And so I had to shield. I had to put up shielding on a wall. And I would so much rather see people doing physical shielding than doing little stickers on their phone. Yeah. I would much rather see people focus on the physical environment and measure and see that it is pristine and create a sanctuary for yourself than having to deceive yourself that some sticker is going to make you safe. because there's no research that shows that you're safe. It might show lowered effect on an EEG, for example, that's great, or lower SAR absorption, that's great. It's not complete. And it's how do we know it's still not affecting the DNA? And it's incomplete information. So people just want that fast fix, and we have to be careful about that and really get the real fix. I have 0 on the meter where I live right now after I did the shielding. It works, and so I'd obviously go in that direction.
And the real fix is accessing these rivers of insight, as you say, surfing this wave, as you say. That's the real fix. It's not something you're just going to. So maybe you can, for a certain period of time, use one of these devices and get some benefit from it. But we don't know. We haven't got the full picture. So there's lots of devices where we've got some research pointing to certain effects, and there are, and research needs to continue on this too. But it's the complete picture we're always missing. Getting a real understanding of how these things are working, that's certainly my view too on this.
I would love to say another thing, Lloyd, which is that in this context of making sure you have the whole picture, that often I have found in working with people that if there is a chronic infection like Lyme disease or parasites or other kinds of infection, that people are more sensitive. And also if people have any impairment in their liver function, like because of infection, this is so common that cleaning up your body of infections, doing parasite cleanses, doing other things to build your resiliency, to build your strength, those can make a big difference too.
Exactly.
Besides the 3 main things I focused on. And so that's really important to, and also to take away the other things that are destabilizing you in terms of cleaning up your diet and doing no GMO foods, and not having vaccines like you mentioned, and making sure you get clean water and exercise and family relationships and stress. I mean, this is a stressor, and it adds to all the other stresses that we've had in our lives, starting from when we were very young. And so people have had various kinds of good and bad experiences through their life, some traumatic. And so I think that the more traumatic things that people have had, the more likely they may be to experience, to be affected by the EMFs. And I know there's great work being done by, have you heard of Annie Hopper?
I have. I've interviewed Annie Hopper, yes.
Oh, you have? Okay, good. I actually met her several years ago. And so, she's working with, the neuroplasticity of the brain and seeing people I know several people personally very well who used her program, who saw a great improvement in their electrosensitivity. Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? So we need to be de-stressing our bodies. This whole experience of knowing that our world is being polluted with this radiation, that no big brother looking out for us, we're polluting our nest. This is stressful in and of itself, just to know how out of control things are and how irresponsible, things are. And so we need it to add every opportunity to de-stress. And if you're really stressed, you can't connect to that intuition, instinct, and that bigger whole as well. Yeah. So it's a key part for any kind of healing from anything, really.
Yeah. Fantastic information. We're out of time. Would you just like to remind people, Camilla, where they can find out more information about what you do?
Sure. I have Manhattan Neighbors for Safer Telecommunications website. Lots of great content, lots of good interviews I've done with different people, video interviews and articles. That's manhattanneighbors.org. Then Electromagnetic Health was my .org was my original website. Lots of good content there. And then I have a Facebook group that's called Campaign for Radiation Free Schools. And so people follow the news on the impact of electromagnetic fields on children and in schools from all over the world there. So join if you're interested in children.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is obviously the most important, is our kids, isn't it? You've got to look after number one, but The wireless elephant in the room, exactly. The most important thing.
It's a great little handout. It's small, and it's a great handout to, educate people. Great little handout.
Yeah. Camilla Reese, thank you so much for being part of the EMF Health Summit. And thank you, too, for all the work you've been putting in over the years, which is just amazing. It's really hats off to you on that. A decade of work now on this. And you've got such great knowledge on this and so much wisdom too. And it is a balancing act when you're talking about EMFs and when you're in this EMF world, to not get drawn back into the problem. And you seem to be performing this balancing act very well. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Lloyd, and thank you for your work. Can't wait to see the whole summit.
Thank you. And for all of you who've joined us today, thanks for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for our next session. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.